Alex Ross, The Rest is Noise, Listening to the 20th Century. Embark on a fascinating exploration of the tumultuous and transformative power of music during the 20th century, with our summary of Alex Ross's The Rest is Noise, Listening to the 20th Century. Discover the profound influence of classical giants such as Richard Wagner and Gustav Mahler on a new generation of daring composers, constantly pushing the limits of tonality and harmony. Immerse yourself in the world of Arnold Schoenberg, Igor Stravinsky, and other avant-garde artists who defied expectations and shaped the music landscape as we know it today. Amidst political upheavals, changing tastes, and global conflicts, witness how classical music evolved and intertwined with other art forms and genres, giving birth to a rich legacy that continues to inspire and innovate.
The Legacy of Wagner. At the turn of the 20th century, Richard Wagner's influence over music was pervasive, and his grandiose operas still captivated European audiences. His impact was so profound that the next wave of composers, including Gustav Mahler and Richard Strauss, grew up under his influence. However, this new generation of composers sought to challenge Wagner's dominance with new and different styles of music. Strauss, in particular, pioneered a new direction in music with Salome, which incorporated dissonances and unconventional harmonies that were sometimes deemed disturbing. Strauss's work signaled a new epoch in music, one defined by creative exploration and a rejection of the past. Mahler, Strauss, and the battle for Viennese music. Mahler and Strauss were friends, but their competitive drive caused strains in their relationship. While Mahler was impressed with Salome, his friend Strauss was envious of Mahler's status as a popular composer. However, what excited young composers like Arnold Schoenberg and Alban Berg was not necessarily what appealed to the general public. Mahler's Sixth Symphony, which premiered in Essen, pushed boundaries with competing musical themes that merged and culminated in an explosive final chord. While Strauss found the symphony to be over-instrumented, it solidified Mahler's status as an exciting artist within the Second Viennese school of classical music. Schoenberg's Sonic Revolution. In early 1900s Vienna, Arnold Schoenberg pioneered a musical movement that embraced atonality, taking dissonance further from traditional tonality and melody. Troubles in his personal life and the influences of his disciples Anton Webern and Alban Berg propelled him into a prolific period of early atonal works that culminated in a scandalous concert featuring a particularly grinding dissonant chord which caused a commotion amongst the audience. Despite the backlash, Schoenberg remained committed to his revolutionary style. Stravinsky, bold innovator of classical music. Russian-born composer Igor Stravinsky gained fame in the early 1900s with his melding of Russian folk traditions and French influences. Portable sound recording equipment introduced city-based composers to the music of different societies around the world, and Stravinsky's use of complex rhythmic patterns and dissonance in compositions like The Firebird and The Rite of Spring cemented his status as a forward-thinking composer. The Rite of Spring's debut caused uproar from some audience members, but Stravinsky's standing ovations set him apart from contemporaries like Schoenberg. The impact of World War I on classical music. After World War I, classical music underwent a transformation. Composers and listeners alike were eager for a new sound that had no ties to the past and was free of any associations that may have been tainted by the war. In Paris, a group of composers called Les Six emerged, who were influenced by the early avant-garde stylings of Erik Satie and the new aggressive music of Stravinsky. They shunned the grandiosity embraced by previous generations, and a new type of music that incorporated American jazz and classical influences began to emerge. Moreover, amidst changing musical trends, there was a push towards formalism, which would have a long-lasting influence. The war brought forth a reckoning and forever changed the evolution of classical music. American classical music. Discover the story of American classical music and its struggle to emerge from the shadow of its European counterpart. Despite the preference for homegrown music, American composers like Charles Ives created strong work in a European-dominated profession. Some composers, like George Gershwin and Leonard Bernstein, blurred the line between opera and musical theater, while others, like Duke Ellington, successfully blended jazz and classical music. American classical music continues to evolve, proving that it can be just as sophisticated as its European counterpart. The politics of music. After the chaos of World War I, the Weimar Republic in Germany struggled to stabilize, and the music scene reflected this political turmoil. Composers were divided between creating accessible music of use and pushing boundaries with formalism and atonal dissonance. Kurt Weill stood out as a composer who sought to make music simpler, clearer, and more transparent. However, the 12-tone form of composing, which used every note before any repetition, became a primary influence on classical music from the 1930s onward. Music and politics in Stalinist Russia. The struggle of Russian composers in creating music that complied with the values of Soviet communism while pushing the boundaries of their art is examined in this summary. Stalin's love for music and the challenges faced by composers such as Dmitry Shostakovich, Gavril Popov, and Sergei Prokofiev are highlighted. Music has always been an essential part of our lives, and in history, it has often been used as a tool for propaganda. The Soviet-Russian regime was no exception, as music was one of the elements used to promote the values of Soviet communism. But this came with its own set of challenges for the composers living under the Stalinist regime. Although Stalin was a music lover, he had strict guidelines about the kind of music that should be produced. The music had to be consistent with the values of Soviet communism and should not be overly complex or atonal. Any music that was believed to be self-serving or indulgent was banned, and the composers who created such music were often penalized. This led to a conundrum for many composers who wanted to push the boundaries of their art while still complying with the rules of their government. Composers like Dmitry Shostakovich, Gavril Popov, and Sergei Prokofiev managed to create interesting and provocative music within the limits established in Stalinist Russia. Shostakovich, in particular, had an uneasy relationship with Stalin. His new opera Lady Macbeth of the Mtsensk district had come under scrutiny from the dictator following a 1936 performance characterized by dissonance and jarring rhythms. However, his Fifth Symphony managed to be emotionally complex while still winning the approval of the censors. During World War II, Shostakovich created his Seventh Symphony, titled Leningrad, which premiered during the city's two-year siege by Nazi Germany. The performance was broadcast over loudspeakers and managed to bolster the Red Army's spirits while demoralizing the invaders. For many composers, breaking from formalism meant their music would not be considered the best in their field. Still, Shostakovich, Prokofiev, and others showed remarkable courage and creativity by making interesting music within the limits of Stalinist Russia. Music, Politics, and Society. This book dives into the relationship between music, politics, and society in the United States during the 1930s and 1940s. The Federal Arts Project, a government-funded initiative to support the arts, had a music-based component that helped around 16,000 musicians and 125 orchestras. However, it also faced fierce opposition and was ultimately dismantled due to political scrutiny. One composer, Aaron Copland, felt the effects of this scrutiny and was even investigated by the FBI due to his attendance at a conference promoting world peace. Despite this, his works continued to convey social messages and evoke the expanse of America. This book explores the intersection of music and politics during a tumultuous time in American history. Avant-garde music after World War II. The post-World War II music scene underwent a reckoning where certain music styles took on new connotations due to the war's atrocities. New musical trends, free of historical baggage, started to emerge. In Germany and France, a new avant-garde rose during the Cold War era. The highly influential group of composers known as the Darmstadt School embraced 12-tone, serial, point, and statistical music. Similarly, in Paris, Pierre Boulez advocated for total serialism. These avant-garde scenes drew bold lines in the sand about which techniques and styles were the right way forward and which weren't, while a different kind of avant-garde music scene took place in the States. The influence of minimalism on American composers. In the 1930s, several European composers migrated to the US, teaching in universities and working in Hollywood. The sunny California climate and flat desert landscape inspired a new avant-garde music known as minimalism. Schoenberg, one of the teachers at the University of Southern California, influenced composers like Lou Harrison and John Cage with his "use only the essentials" advice. Cage befriended other minimalist composers like Morton Feldman and drew inspiration from trips abroad. In New York, the bohemian art scene facilitated cross-pollination of ideas between different artists and influenced composers like Cage. The uptown-downtown divide in the 1950s and 60s signified a shift towards more experimental music, and Cage was at its center. The rise of minimalism. The 1960s brought a change in classical music with the rise of minimalism. This movement brought back tonality, repetitive rhythm, and a sense of space in place of the atonal, polyrhythmic and discordant music of the past. One of the most well-known minimalist pieces was Cage's 4 feet 33 inches, which consisted of the musicians sitting in silence to showcase the environment's sounds. Cage deconstructed musical composition using the Chinese I Ching to introduce randomness to the process, making composing music accessible to everyone. Minimalist performances often featured happenings or were multimedia events. Philip Glass and Steve Reich also contributed monumental works during this period. Glass incorporated Indian music elements in his music, while Reich took the use of repetition to new heights, making contemporary classical music popular with listeners. Classical influence in modern music. As the 20th century drew to a close, traditional musical boundaries had begun to blur. This led to a wave of innovative composers fusing classical techniques with pop culture. The Beatles and The Who were among the influential rock bands that took cues from the pioneering minimalist Terry Riley and the Darmstadt school's Karlheinz Stockhausen. Meanwhile, acclaimed musicians such as Brian Eno and Bang on a Can were incorporating classical elements and ideas into their own compositions. Today, modern acts like Radiohead and Björk continue to draw from classical traditions, proving that classical music is an enduring source of inspiration for contemporary artists. Despite the immediate appeal of pop songs, classical music's open, sprawling format enables composers to explore the intricacies of the human experience and push creative boundaries.
In The Rest is Noise, Alex Ross masterfully captures the compelling journey of 20th century classical music from its auspicious beginnings, in the shadow of the larger-than-life Richard Wagner to the innovative, genre-defying sounds of modern-day composers. The book offers a unique perspective on music's power to reflect and shape society while also examining the personal struggles and obstacles composers faced as their work pushed the boundaries of artistic expression. As classical music wove its way through political turbulence, technological advancements, and evolving tastes, it influenced and inspired countless other art forms and genres. The result is a complex yet captivating tapestry of sound, a fitting tribute to the boundless creativity that characterized the 20th century.